Good morning. My name is Mandy Barker, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a quick lesson on understanding digital media literacy. This lesson would be appropriate for ninth grade. It has been aligned to the Common Core ELA standards, and I actually adapted this from an OER Commons lesson that is available for all, and I've shared the link here. It actually aligns with these specific standards on evaluating reasoning and arguments, also how to integrate media into presentations. I'm sure you could find more standards if you would like. These are just the two that are the most common. So what are we going to learn in this lesson? We want students to learn how to define digital media literacy. What does that even mean? How did we evaluate credibility of sources? And then, most importantly, how can you detect bias and misinformation? Because let's be real, where do we get most of our information? When my students say, they said, and I say, well, who is they? Most of the time, we're talking about TikTok. It could be on Instagram. It's probably a YouTube video they've seen. But we need to look at, what are their sources and where are they getting their information? Why is this important? Because digital media is everywhere. Students have to learn to think critically about what they consume. Not just students, adults. And so, as a teacher, we can help them kind of walk through this confusing pathway. So the first thing I would do with this lesson is I would have students start talking about, what are types of digital media? And hopefully they're going to brainstorm those questions and start coming up with all the ones that they see. But we're talking about social media, we're talking about news websites, blogs and vlogs, podcasts, which are becoming more and more popular with my students, YouTube. There's so many types of digital media that they are surrounded by every single day. I mean, how many of us wake up and the first thing we do is grab our phone? Well, if I'm an adult and I do that, can you imagine what the students are doing? The first part of this lesson I would have focus on is how do I evaluate those sources? Well, an easy way to evaluate those sources is to use the CRAP test. Um, so when we talk about the CRAP test, how do we know if it's crap is kind of what I would talk to my students about. And the C stands for currency. And all that means is how up to date is it? Is it relevant to 2025 or has it been out there for a few years? Relevance for the R. How well does the info meet your needs? Is it relevant for what you're researching? A, authority. Who provided the information? Is it just some influencer on TikTok or is it a reliable source? Accuracy. How reliable or correct would the information be? And then purpose. Whoever put this information out there, what was their purpose? Was it to inform? Was it to entertain? Was it to just get your attention? Clickbait. So we need to pay attention to all of these pieces when we're looking at sources. So the CRAP test is amazing. And students love the acronym because it says crap, right? Is it crap? So that's something that resonates with them and it's easy for them to remember. Next, let's look at is it credible or non-credible? Some easy ways to see that would be credible. You can look for things like .edu, .gov, professional journalism. You may want to have a conversation about what is professional journalism. And then we have non-credible, when no author can be found or if you see bias throughout the entire post or article, and then that's where a good conversation about bias comes up. Or there's no sources listed. It's just information that's been shared and no source has been shared to support that information. All right, so at this time in the lesson, what I would have them do is I would stop, and we all know that with students, a lot of the times If you just talk the whole time, they checked out about 10 minutes into the conversation. So throughout this lesson, there'll be little stops where students are asked to do some work. And in this case, this would be a source check. So you have the students look at a headline. You could pick one for them or actually have the students find their own headline. And then they would have 3 questions to ask themselves. Is it clickbait? Who is the author? Is it opinion or is it fact? And so what I would do, depending on what we're studying, is I would try to find a headline that tied in with the topic. And so once I found that headline, I would have them look at that, share that link with them, and then I would have them go through these steps, and then I would have them share out. So where we might have a group discussion or they may share out with a partner. It's good to get them thinking about what you're discussing. Next thing I would look for is bias in media, because a lot of the times we don't realize that the bias exists. Students think if they see it, they hear it, then it must be true. And so we talk about bias, and media's bias shapes how stories are told. We get into that whole debate on, what news channel do you watch, or what social media do you follow? And so we start to talk about bias and what that actually means. We also need to look at loaded language when we start looking at, more emotional words rather than factual words. And we talk about perspective, who's telling the story, what might influence them in their perspective. So these are all great things for students to discuss. And they get very, very involved in the ownership of it, who's right, who's wrong. And it leads to great discussions. You just have to kind of keep them in check a little bit. So with this bias comes fact versus opinion. Now, this is that age-old lesson that they learn in elementary school, but a lot of the times when we put information before our high school students, there's a struggle with fact versus opinion and what it means by a fact can be verified. So this would be where we pull some pieces of information and say, is this a fact or is it an opinion? Can we prove it? Can it be verified? Or is it just somebody's belief or judgment? Some signs, red flags, so to speak, for detecting misinformation would be looking for all caps or emotional language, which we just talked about a little. No author, no sources. When students see these little red flags, then they can know that that's probably a warning that it's not going to be a very reliable source. So, when we look at articles, social media posts, YouTube videos, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what's the purpose? Are they trying to inform us? Are they trying to persuade us? Or is it just for entertainment? So you ask yourself, why did they create this? What was their end goal? Because when we look at author's purpose, we can often decide, is this a reliable source? Visual literacy. Oh, so many of my students are visual learners. And so the visual appeal of what's on social media or YouTube can draw them in very quickly. And so when we talk about visual literacy, we're talking about images, we're talking about videos, or even memes that carry messages, sometimes hidden messages that we aren't really even paying attention to. And so what we have to learn to do is evaluate the context and the source. Who is presenting this information and what are they trying to tell us? So it would be time for practice because, like I said, every few minutes in the lesson, we would want to go and kind of have some practice, some move around, some talk, some think about what we've been discussing. And so with the practice, I would have them find an image, video, or meme online and look at the context and the source. What's the purpose? Why did the author present this? Were they informing, persuading, entertaining? And then I would have them pair and share with the neighbor. And so would be just like a quick 10-minute activity where they get a chance to actually practice what we've been talking about. So, always important to put that in your lesson. The last element would be digital citizenship. What does that mean? Well, let's have a conversation of what it means to be a good citizen and let's move from there. Because most of our high school students understand what citizenship is, but how does that apply to the digital world? So we would talk about respecting others online because it's so easy sometimes when we're behind that screen to just kind of post things that we wouldn't normally say face to face. So let's talk about respecting others online. Let's talk about not using plagiarism. We've got to avoid plagiarism. They hear that over and over, but a lot of the times they don't realize that they do it inadvertently. So let's talk about how we avoid plagiarism and then protecting privacy. Privacy is a big one, especially with high school students. At the end of this lesson, I would talk about maybe whole group, maybe in our journals with a quick write. Two questions I would want them to discuss and think about. Have you seen fake news online? And how do you decide what's trustworthy? Because at the end of the day, this is what matters the most. How do we know if something's fake? And how do we decide if it's trustworthy? Because that's important before we start sharing or posting it, resharing, retweeting, telling our friends what we saw online. How do we know it's trustworthy? And I have a feeling students are going to have lots of opinions on this. So to wrap this up, the main purpose of this lesson is digital literacy. What does that even mean? Well, it's critical thinking. We've got to be able to think for ourselves. We've got to be able to break things down. And then responsible sharing. We have to learn what's okay to share and what's maybe something that needs to be left where it is. At the end of this lesson, when class is getting ready to wrap up, I would have them do a quick exit ticket, and I would have them write one thing that they learned and one question that they still have. And then maybe the next day, I would take some of those questions and we would address those in our next step. So I found this lesson, as I shared earlier, off of the OER Commons. I've linked here where the lesson is. Just great to know that these sources are available. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel. As teachers, we collaborate all the time, and OER Commons is a great way to find lessons and then adapt them to fit your needs in the classroom so that you can serve all the learners. Also, just as a teacher, to take advantage of all the materials that are available online so that we can be better teachers to serve all the students in our classrooms. Thank you for listening.